Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today we are so happy to be joined by relationship coach, screenwriter, author, podcaster, so much more, Allison Raskin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It is a delight to be here.
It is a delight. I have to say, I was reading one of your books last night and I was crying. You got me good.
Really?
Yeah. I was just thinking about things. I was just being introspective, which we're going to talk about. But you brought up a lot of you know what? I should really examine that. I should really think about that for me. But yes, we are so excited to have you. We're so lucky we get to talk to amazing people in this show. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
I can, and I will try to be as concise as possible just because I've done a lot of different things. But I'd say that how I present myself now is I'm a relationship coach, a mental health advocate, and I'm also a podcaster and writer. So I came up, if you were big into BuzzFeed video back in the day, that sort of launched my career. From there, I had a YouTube channel called Just Between Us. That's now a podcast with my co-host, Gabe Dunn. And then in addition to just going the more mainstream, trying to sell TV shows, movies track, I also sort of took this pivot in my career into the mental health space. So I got a master's degree in psychology, and I've written 2 nonfiction books about the intersection between mental health and romantic relationships. And then most recently, which I'm really excited to talk about, I have my first rom-com novel coming out, which sort of lets me examine all of those things in a fictional, fun lens. And that book is called Save the Date, and it's out April 8th. So I'm very excited to be venturing into that new genre as an author and just as a fan.
Yes. Oh, we're going to talk about that more for sure later. But congratulations. That's awesome.
That's a
Thank
lot.
you.
Yes, it is difficult when there are so many topics we could obviously ask you about because you have done so much, and it can be hard to narrow it down to this can't be a 10-part series. Well, I guess it could be, but that's not what it is today.
I am available if you're
Yes. Add Allison as a regular, because that's a huge topic in conversation. Relationships and mental health, isn't that, man.
It's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot to cover.
It is. And that was definitely one of the things we wanted to focus on in this conversation, because you talk a lot about the intersection of mental health when it comes to relationships. So just to give us kind of a foundation, can you break down some basic ways that mental health and relationships can intersect?
Definitely. So I really like to think about it as romantic relationships. And a lot of what I end up saying about romantic relationships do apply to, friendships, family relationships. But, for the sake of clarity, I kind of come into it through the romantic relationship lens. That's the area of our life where we are the most vulnerable, where we are expected to be the most intimate. And it's also an area of our life where rejection is the most common outcome, right? Often, we feel a different, not everyone, but there's, friendship breakups aren't talked about the same way. Family estrangement obviously happens, but it's definitely not the norm. Where when you enter into the dating world, rejection is sort of inevitable, right? And so it can really impact our mental health in this way, because on the one hand, it can just really alter our sense of self and the way that we handle that rejection and the beliefs we have around rejection. And additionally, because it's this area where we are so vulnerable, it can sort of exacerbate underlying mental health issues that we might be dealing with. So it might be this sense of where we're losing control of ourselves, where our anxiety is peaked more than it would normally be, or it's just that you struggle with your mental health and now you're having to have this new person be witness to that, right? To see what it is like to live with OCD, what it is like to live with being bipolar, to really let them in with this understanding that they can then say, no, thank you, which is really terrifying.
Yeah, it certainly is. And you've been very open about your own experiences in that realm of having something like OCD and dating, and how that can manifest in this huge variety of ways. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that dating can look differently for someone who has anxiety or who has OCD?
So the obsessionality can be really amped up, right? So like I remember when I was dating, like if someone didn't text me back, that became intolerable. Like I could not just exist in the world knowing that someone I liked hadn't texted me back. Like it was all consuming. It was all I thought about. And then the reaction is to try to make that distress go away by sending the second text, by sending the third text, by sort of engaging in this way that I objectively knew was not how I wanted to be presenting myself to that person, but I felt unable to control it because my desire to alleviate the discomfort was so huge. And so that's sort of how we can sort of like lose track of ourselves, where it's like, why did I behave like that? It's like, because you were just so in such dysregulation and so much distress, you were doing anything you could to feel better. But unfortunately, the roots to feel better ended up maybe harming the relationship that you were trying to strengthen. Also, just the idea of checking, right? Like a lot of OCD can be around checking if that something is okay. So the checking of like, you know, do you like me? Do you like me enough? Where is this going? You know, I was very insistent on feeling like it was every relationship was heading towards commitment, and then every relationship was heading towards marriage. And unfortunately, like that's not like super fun or viable in your mid-20s with a lot of people. And, you know, looking back, at the time I was like, well, that's just what I wanted for myself. And now I realize like it was me trying to find a sense of safety. I felt that if I could get to that level of commitment, then I could finally relax. I could finally feel in control of my life. And it was only once I had my broken engagement and my fiance left that I was like, oh, these goalposts don't actually provide safety. Like you can be engaged, they can leave abruptly in the middle of the week. You can be married and you end up divorced. Like the illusion of safety doesn't actually exist or protect you. And so I've had to really reshape my relationship towards uncertainty in all areas of my life and my tolerance for discomfort to be able to still strive to have the relationships that I want to have while accepting the risk that's inherent in having them.
Sounds like you've had to work through a lot in getting here, as well as learning about it through an educational lens, which is, I'm very fascinated by this. We'll come back to that, because one of the things when you talk about relationships and when you talk about mental health, lately, that's a whole TikTok trend, right? Everybody trying to find these little like diagnoses and telling you what's wrong with you and telling you have this and these are the signs in your relationships. But with that, we know people get it wrong. So what are some of the things that you think a lot of people get wrong when they think about this or have this conversation or try to do this as a trend?
I have a very mixed relationship towards diagnosing and pathologizing, because for me, having had an OCD diagnosis since I was 4 years old was actually so helpful and so affirmative in my life that the way that I was behaving was because of a disorder in my brain. Like I take a very externalizing approach to my OCD. I view it as an illness. I view it as something that is on top of my true self. And by being able to do that and being able to label certain thoughts as OCD thoughts, it allows me to stay truer to who I am and to not give it as much power over me. So I'm very pro diagnosis when it is helpful and true, right? I think that sometimes there can be an over pathologizing that is happening that actually leads to a lack of flexibility that is necessary for us to like adapt to what is actually happening in our different contexts. Like, and it can also lead to sort of like limited information around something if you're getting it from just like a really quick and easy source. Like, so for example, there's like a lot around attachment style that's very, zeitgeisty. And attachment is a really important thing to understand and it's helpful to know about. But I think something people don't understand is that your attachment style can change, right? Like, and honestly, the goal is for it to change and to become secure. And also your attachment style can show up differently in different relationships. So I think that some people have taken it on as an identity. And I find that could potentially be harmful because it makes it seem like growth is impossible and that change in relationship is impossible. And it becomes this shorthand that sort of oversimplifies the complexity that is each of our own individual experiences.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about your writing is that you delve into those complexities and those nuances and how it can, because I feel like a lot of times, when you're in a relationship or when you break up, you want to be like, that person was wrong. It definitely wasn't me. Like that kind of talk. But you were very like, well, here's what was going on here and here's what's going on here. Like looking into all of what was happening and the mistakes people made. But something else you talked about that really resonated with me is that you, for a while, held on to this belief that you would find your one true love and they would fix you. That's just what you needed. And it was like, well, part of your driving factor of why you wanted to find this life partner and why it was so stressful and when it came to dating. So can you talk about why that was and what it meant for you when you realized that it wasn't true?
I think a lot of it had to do with, growing up mentally ill and not having good social skills and really struggling in my friendships and in dating and feeling like an outsider, that I wasn't living life correctly, and that I was just like waiting for the next phase, like for my life to really start and begin and to feel comfortable in my own skin. And I really felt that by being chosen, by having this like life partner and buddy, that I could like relax, that I could sink into that. My parents had a really beautiful marriage until my mother unfortunately passed away this last September. And they were such a rock for me that I was like, well, if I can just get what they have, then I'll finally feel like at peace with myself, and I'll be able to engage in life and enjoy my experiences more. And what shifted for me wasn't that I stopped wanting a partner, right? Like that would be like a fun, neat story of like, and then I learned I just needed to be by myself. Like that's actually not my journey and a narrative that I kind of actively push against, because what I've come to understand is having a life partner or having periods of your life with the partner, not all partnerships last till death, but it's a lifestyle choice. It's just a way that you build your day-to-day life that is different than people that don't want that choice, right? Like I'm someone that just genuinely thrives and enjoys partnership. I really love living with my husband. I love having a husband. I love the friendship that our marriage brings with it. I love that like there's another person to walk the dog, that there's someone that makes me dinner and that I show up for and he shows up for me and we are checking in on each other. And there is like this interdependence that I really find a lot of strength and freedom in. Like I always say, like it would have been much harder for me to complete my grad school program if I didn't have my husband there, like helping me. And now he's in grad school full time and I'm supporting him while he does that. And that's like like sort of what a lot like the strength of partnership. But what I had to adjust to was this idea that without that piece, I was worthless. Right? Because that's a step that's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to say that without someone picking me, my life has no value or something is wrong with me. Instead, it was coming to terms with the fact that like I had to really like myself. I had to become someone that I really liked. And then through that, I could attract someone that felt the same way rather than attracting someone that maybe like was like half in, not in, or feeling like I had to change for them. And it also created this different dynamic where when I was dating, it was like, take me, like, not take me or leave me, because I don't like love the, if you can't have me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. Like we're responsible for our our actions, and we shouldn't treat our partners badly. But, like a level of like someone's rejection did not sway me the way that it would have, because I was more secure in who I was. So it became safer to engage with dating because rejection, while painful, wasn't mentally dangerous. It wasn't destabilizing in the same way. It was more like, okay, on to the next, because like I know what I want and who I am, and I like that. And so that was the shift, more so than rejecting my desire for partnership, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to lie. As I'm sitting here, I'm like analyzing the characters of Sex and the City as you speak. I know that's a weird moment. I'm like, Charlotte really needed to hear this.
I absolutely love that that's where you were going.
I don't know why that just popped in my head, but I was like, yeah. Instead of myself, instead of me, probably really absolutely needless advice, I'm just like, Charlotte, that definitely is her.
But she's someone that thrives in partnership, right?
Yes.
But she had to figure out how to approach it in a healthier way.
See, maybe we need you back on to watch. We do a series where we watch and then analyze what's happening and how well it stood up at test of time. Maybe we need you to come and be a part of that episode.
I would be honored. I love that show. For better or worse, I could watch it all day long, every day.
With all the bad, there's some real good stuff in it, and the rewatch has been amazing. But yeah, I think we're gonna have to put that as a side note. Allison, yes, Sex and the City. Obviously, again, all this is such great advice, and you writing it out to give these people advice. You're also doing the relationship coaching, which I know you said you've done a few appointments today, just today alone, which is awesome. So in your work, you've spoken about disparities that you've seen around mental health and the marginalized folks and the communities. Can you speak about that? Because that seems like such a big, important conversation we don't have enough of when it comes to relationships.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, the history of psychology is not a pretty one. It's like been very much built around like white males, like white straight males. And so I understand why there's definitely reluctance in certain communities to really engage with mental health treatment and mental health professionals, because there's an inherent distrust that I think deserves to be there. And I find that to be just kind of heartbreaking for those communities, because, for every bad clinician, there's a good clinician. And so but the issue is how do you rebuild the trust in different communities that either have had negative experiences or have been taught that that's not something that they should seek out because there's still a lot of stigma around it. And so what I'm really hoping is just that the access, that's one of the positives of this social media of it all, is like having access to more voices in the mental health field, hearing from other people who have had better experiences. And something I think that's really important to do is to make it known what bad therapy looks like. Because if you don't know what bad therapy looks like, you might be having a bad experience and thinking, well, that's me, or, like I'm not fixable, or I'm just a bad client. And it's like, no, there are just bad therapists out there, and we don't ever talk about that. And so like things to look for are, as someone who is like tries to assume expertise over your own life, right? Like you're the expert in your life, and someone that is attempting to like overpower that, or in some way really use like an uneven power dynamic to put you down. If you're feeling judged by a therapist, if you feel like your therapist has absolutely no understanding of your culture, you know, you see this a lot where people from certain really community, family focused cultures, the therapist will just be like, well, just don't see your parents. Like, just don't go to family events anymore if like that's stressful to you. And it's like, excuse me, I'm from like a Latin community and I can't possibly do that. Like, what are you talking about? You know, so finding therapists that are, you know, have cultural humility is really important. Finding therapists that understand what you're actually dealing with. Not all therapists are specialized in every issue or disorder, right? So there's going to be therapists that are not very familiar with OCD, or therapists that are not super trauma informed and then are just trying to CBT your way out of trauma that isn't going to work. And so I think really empowering people to have a better understanding of what to expect and to let them know that these are people, that they're flawed, and that you're allowed to be picky around who you engage with. And you know, having started this coaching business, I definitely had some reservations around being a relationship coach, especially having gotten a master's in psychology and being in school with people that were going the licensing route. And, you know, part of me was like, is this unethical? Like, am I just sort of like cheating the system by, you know, being a coach where I don't have a license? There is not a licensing board that is supervising, you know, that like someone can't just like go and complain to me about me to a licensing board. But what's been really interesting in doing the work is I think that coaching allows for some freedom and directiveness that traditional therapy doesn't. And so I think that there really is space for both of these things. And it's about what you want and what you're looking for. So one of the reasons I didn't become a licensed therapist is because I'm a public figure. I mean, you probably haven't heard of me, but if you looked me up on the internet, there's like, you know, hundreds of hours of me talking. You can read my books. Like you know so much about me if you wanted to engage with that. And I felt like that wasn't going to be safe for certain clients under the traditional therapy model. I felt like that if you're going to a therapist, you really want them to be maybe not a blank slate, but to not know the intimate personal details of their life. That's just not what the field is set up around. And so I felt like I couldn't really work within the confines of therapy, but I also felt like I really did want to do this work with people. And coaching, I think the buy-in is so different. The buy-in is that they do know who I am and that they do know the things that I have gone through. And so like maybe whereas like if you went to your therapist and you were like, I just saw a video that you had a broken engagement, like why would I trust you? My clients come to me and they're like, I saw you survived a broken engagement. That's why I trust you. And so I think it's kind of exciting that there are these two kind of different options. And coaching also really allows me to be much more directive. Like I can give my opinion in a way that like therapists really are not supposed to. I do it with, you know, in communication with my client. I'm always like, you can push back. You don't have to agree with me. How is this feeling? But they're coming to me because they want a more directive approach. And I think that can really be an avenue for people who, you know, have felt maybe that therapy was just them talking and they weren't really getting the advice or tools or strategies that they're looking for. And so I think it's exciting that there's both, but you know, I also have a huge obligation to be as ethical as possible, to let people know my limitations, to make it very clear I'm not licensed. But I think whereas when I started this, it was more like, oh no, is it bad I'm not a therapist? Now I'm like, oh, I love that I'm not a therapist.
Right. No, I think that makes perfect sense, because a lot of people who come into like coaching routes, like life coaching, all that, oftentimes do it because they're good at giving advice and people like their advice. But the fact that you actually went ahead and did your education and did a background, that says a lot to how grounded you are in that work. So absolutely, kudos with all of that. And I do have a couple of questions. My background is in social work. And obviously, I did not go into licensing or any of that as well. I did not do the micro practices in general. However, because I do have two parts. So one, I'll split it up. So here's the first part. What's some advice you have when it comes to talking about your mental health with a partner?
This is really tricky, right? Because sometimes when you're just starting to date and you've had a pretty significant mental health history, there's a desire to sort of share compulsively, where it's like, let me just put it all out there so that you can either say yes or no to my entire life. And what I really advise people to do instead is to share with purpose and to be in control of the sharing and what they're sharing and why they're sharing it. So, for example, if you are just still casually getting to know someone, it might be okay to be like, yeah, I have anxiety. I take Zoloft and I found it really helpful. And then you continue bowling. But if you are getting, deeper and more close with someone, then it can make sense to go more into all of the history and the things that have happened. But also I think it can be really important to lead with who you are now, right? Because sometimes there are elements of our mental health story that can be rather shocking and upsetting, but is not necessarily a representative of who we are in this moment. And so I think it can be important to say right now, I'm in therapy, I'm doing really well. This is something that I'm on top of. Yes, in the past, I did really struggle with suicidal ideation, and maybe you even had an attempt, but that's different than being actively suicidal in this moment and being able to say and here are the steps that I took to protect myself from falling back into that place. And so I think that really presenting your mental health history as something that is your responsibility is also a way to keep the person from feeling like they are now taking on that by being with you. It's really saying this is a thing that I've been dealing with and that I'm on top of. And so I'm telling you because I want you to get to know me more, not because this is your problem to deal with or to fix. And if you're someone where it's you're in a place where you don't really have a handle on those things, then that might just be an indicator that looking for a relationship right now might not be the best thing for you.
It's one of those moments where when you're coming out with all the trauma all at once with all the peoples, you might want to think about handling that trauma just for a minute.
But the way we share signals how the other person receives it, right? So if I share with shame, if I share with agitation, if I share with the expectation that you're going to be shocked or uncomfortable or really uninterested afterwards, then that person's going to kind of take that agitation and feelings on. But if you share from a place of ownership, if you share from a place of, I have an understanding of this, I have a conceptualization of what has happened, and I'm just giving you information so that you can get to know me, the way they're going to receive that information is likely different.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is the second part, because as a person who's been in the field for a while, how do you, as the person who has seen these things, has worked with people, separate analyzing everybody to death from your relationships? Do you know what I mean? When I come into new relationships, my immediate was let me diagnose them with the following things. These are the things that I see of you. How do you stop that?
Oh, that's so interesting. I guess I don't have too much of that instinct. I will say a disproportionate amount of people in my life probably have OCD, and I have wondered if that is just like attracting or what that's about, And so that can sometimes be probably maybe the thing that that pops up the most for me is like if I'll see certain, you know, and I think I'll see certain OCD tendencies, or they'll like end up sharing that with me to sort of gauge my reaction on it.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, I've gotten to a place of I'm not so interested in necessarily like diagnosing someone. I'm interested in understanding them.
Yeah.
And so like if I learn something about their family, it'll be like, oh, and that makes sense, blank. Like if I learn something about their job or how they view the world, then it'll be like, okay, like it's sort of like I'm putting these puzzle pieces together rather than like hunting for like a label or something like that.
Yeah. I've been accused of being a little too intense with my questions. So.
This is perhaps how you got on this show
It's
originally.
true, actually.
Because we were at a cheese night together, and all of a sudden I'm spilling my heart out to Samantha.
And then my next conversation is, we need therapy. We should do this on mic.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yes.
I'm fine. Everything's fine over here.
Oh, definitely. This is actually a conversation we have a lot, Samantha and I, on this show. You are very open about a lot of things that have happened in your life. And we often talk about where are our boundaries and what is like helpful and what is not helpful for us. And that conversation can look different for everybody. But for you, have you found kind of your like a balance in what you'll share and what you won't? Is it something you find really liberating, or is it something you find frightening, or all of the above?
My rule is really about what is mine and what is someone else's. So I'd say that the biggest boundaries I have are things that involve other people. So I have to be really mindful about when I'm talking about something regarding my husband or my family or other beings. So that's where like there's stuff where like you guys, like my audience just has no idea about certain areas of my life. And it's not because I want to keep it from them. It's because I have to honor the privacy of people in my life and who I care about. And then I'd say the only other really big boundary I have is around like my sex life is something I really don't like talking about. I had to write about it in Overthinking About You because I was like, this would just not be fair not to. And so at the time I just told my mom and dad, I was like, just don't read chapter 6. And, you know, honestly, like now that my mom is dead and my dad doesn't really listen to my stuff, I'm like, who knows what's coming. But for right now, that's been probably like the biggest boundary that is mine that I've sort of created because of my comfort level. But if you read chapter 6 of Overthinking About You, you will sort of learn quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
You're not. You got past that part.
Yeah, sure did. I can tell you were very uncomfortable, but you were fighting through it. It was great. It was because you were so open about it, and you were like, I am uncomfortable. I'm going to tell you, but we're going to get through this.
And then I had to read the audiobook, and I was like, oh my God, why did I put this in print?
Yes.
Yeah, we just had, not like a couple of years ago, we just had that experience of like, if we had known this was going to be audio, we would have not written it this way.
You have the audio engineer who's like, ooh.
Yep. Get to know you real quick.
Something else that you have written a lot about are modern relationships and marriage, which makes sense. What are some of the ways that you think modern relationships are different? Just inherently kind of things are changing.
They're not societally required in the same way, which is so exciting, right? I mean, boomers have like the highest divorce rate. And I think it's because they had to get married and they had to do it young and they had to do it without, as much discernment as maybe they wanted to have because it was a certain time, a certain place. Here's who I'm dating let's give it a go. And I think, as someone who is actually really pro-marriage, I think one of the best things about modern marriage is less people are getting married. And that's good, because marriage isn't for everyone, and it doesn't make sense for everyone. And it is a very specific choice that has to align with your values and what you want for yourself. And I also think, as I explored a lot I think the idea that now we get to create what marriage is for us as a partnership between two individuals, rather than trying to fit ourselves into the institution of marriage and whatever that is like preconceived to be. Like, my marriage can look totally different than your marriage, and like, how wonderful is that? So rather than like a complete rejection of the institution, I really encourage people to have a reimagining of it, and also decide if it's something that even makes sense for them.
I love that. I say this as a person also in the very weird place of like, nah, I'm good. No marriage for me. I've seen it. I'm good. We're fine with the partnership here. But with marriages and a lot of experiences, let's talk about your newest release. How was this experience of writing a fictional rom-com, like rom-com book that obviously you said you were a fan of, especially because you involved your own life. Like, you did some real personal like perspective into a rom-com. Tell us about this experience.
So Save the Date was based on a joke my father made, and he's so proud of himself, which was basically in 2020, my fiance just like abruptly left me with like little to no explanation. And it was like peak pandemic. Like, I had to fly home to New York to grieve, but like I had to like be in a mask and separated from my family for the first week. And like the first few days afterwards, like when I was still in LA, like my friends came to visit me, but like they couldn't hug me, So I'm just like sobbing in a parking lot, and they're just like reaching towards me. But like, I mean, it was just like as dramatic as it could possibly be. And so I get home and I'm like I'm recuperating. And my dad is like, well, we still have the wedding planner. Like, why don't you just try to find a groom in time for your original wedding? And I was like, Dad, that is bonkers. But what a wonderful idea for a fictional story. And so, it wasn't something I dived into right away. Like, I obviously needed space to heal. I needed space to fall in love again and sort of like emerge from that chapter in my life in order to kind of go back and fictionalize it. But it was really fun to sort of like, I kind of describe it as sort of like a multiverse version of my broken engagement, like if I had taken a different route, because so much of what happened during that time was that I had been writing overthinking about you during that period of my life. And so I actively had to sit down and delete my fiance from my book. Like, I had to like go through and like edit him out. And like the entire final chapter of Overthinking About You was a chapter about my relationship with him and how we were building this beautiful life for ourselves. And I had to just cut the whole thing.
Ow.
And I had to come up with a new ending. And the ending went from, how do you build a life together to like, how do you not give up? Like, how do you keep going even after your very worst fear came true? Which to me was like, just like being rejected by this person I'd finally felt that level of safety with. And how do I not have this massive backslide in my sense of self and my mental health and all of these things? I ended up like applying all of the lessons I'd learned in my research to myself. And so then I really wanted the novel to incorporate that story as well, to not just be like, it's zany, obviously. Like, she's obviously behaving badly in a lot of ways by kind of keeping to this plan, but to have it be more than just saving her personal face, but her sort of trying, in the book, Emma is a couples therapist sort of turned YouTuber. So she has this like online following, and there's this like public element to what she's doing. And so for her, it really becomes more about sort of like making this point about love and about commitment and compatibility, and how, I think in Western culture, we have this idea that things have to follow this very specific timeline and path before it's acceptable to get married, where, in other cultures, it's like you don't have that same expectation of having known each other for as long. And so she was sort of pushing back against some of these cultural norms and ideas, and it allowed me to sort of explore that stuff within this really fun structure and genre of a traditional rom-com. So it really got to scratch both my itch as like as a fiction writer, a screenwriter, and then also as a mental health advocate and relationship expert.
Yes, I love that. Well, you mentioned you're a big fan of the genre rom-coms. We over here love tropes. Why do you think some of these rom-com tropes, why are they so enduring? And what do you think are some of the most harmful ones?
Ooh, interesting. I think every story has been told before. Like, I think that there's this idea that, like, that's similar to that. How dare you? And it's like everything is similar to everything. The difference is the details. And there's a reason that certain tropes and stories and plot points work, because they're satisfying to us. Like, it is satisfying for there for the end of Act 2 to be, the dark day of the soul, and like the dark night of the soul, and then for like things to turn around in Act 3. Like, that's like, we like knowing where the story is going. Obviously some things are more avant-garde or break the rules, and that's cool too. But they're like knowing, like, enemies to lovers, like, where I'm here for it. I know I'm going to get a happy ending. And I think that that's the best trope of a romance book, is it is not a romance book if these people do not end up together. It is something else. It can be something great, but it's not a romance. And so as someone who is like very over all of the devastation and sadness that is the world, and wants to go to narrative to escape that, to not just be hit over the head with like sadness and desperation all of the time, I think like knowing that like that's what you're getting in for with a romance book is so great. I think maybe, harmful tropes are like, I think, where like the relationship dynamic is not actually healthy, right? So like any sort of thing where someone is a captive or, taken advantage of, or, anything that glorifies abuse in any way, don't love that. But I think for the majority of what's going on in this genre, it's more just like wish fulfillment, really letting you explore really complex elements of human life without it feeling like you're slogging through something that is just like purely dramatic or traumatic or sad. I mean, that's kind of why I really am excited to be in this genre, is because I can like explore mental health in this way. I don't have to like get someone to buy into a book about being unlovable and anxiety. I get someone to buy into the idea of like a fun rom-com where a girl tries to find a groom in time for her original wedding date, that I get to add that stuff, and my next one is all about OCD and grief and like these subjects that are not inherently what you would think about with a romance, but like is what you're allowed to explore in that genre, so long as you're hitting the satisfying beats of two people falling in love.
Yes. That's so fantastic. Well, speaking of, you've also written a lot about breakups. Obviously, that's a big part of dating. And as you mentioned, this book, you do bring in elements of that. And you've written about how, after that happened, you were worried people would be like, oh, why should I go to her? Like you were saying about therapy or all of that. But you've also written about the kind of the intersection of mental health and the breakup. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I think breakups are really devastating, even if you're at your most mentally stable. But if you are someone that has real ups and downs in their mental health, it can be pretty destabilizing. And so I think that it's important to honor and understand how deeply painful a breakup is and to put in some added support to yourself to get yourself through that situation. And I also think it's important to not engage with certain harmful thought patterns around it. So one of like the most harmful thought patterns I find is the what if thoughts of like, what if I had done this differently? What if we had met earlier? What if? And it's trying to solve a problem that that already happened, right? It's like, and it's trying to solve something that you would never know the answer to. Like, I will never know if my fiance would have stayed if there hadn't been a pandemic. Like, I suspect probably, but I don't know. And so my hunt to know is a useless quest that can really stir up rumination and can really get us trapped in the past and make it hard for us to move forward. So I really like instead to encourage people to take a radical acceptance point of view when it comes to a breakup, where it is like, obviously this is not what I wanted to happen, but this is what happened. And since it is what happened, what do I do now? Rather than focusing on the past or feeling like it means some great thing about your future, right? We tend to catastrophize. This person left, that means everyone will leave me. I'm heartbroken now, I will be heartbroken forever. Like, really trying to look at what is true, what is logical, and where can we go from here, rather than overly predicting the future or staying in the past.
Yes. And Samantha and I love a good activity or a good thought experiment. And you have a lot of those in your books about reframing those sort of thoughts and identifying the helpful ones and not helpful ones. I wanted to ask you this, and it could be your answer is just no. But as a podcast that is in the intersectional feminist space, sometimes it gives me pause that relationship podcasts are often gendered as feminine for women. Has that been your experience? Like, we know rom-coms are, but like relationship podcasts are. So I was just curious if you had any thoughts about that, or if maybe you haven't seen that and it's just me.
I think that writing, especially my most recent nonfiction I think about modern marriage. The book is very non-gendered, and it is very inclusive. At least that was a priority for me. But it was also important to acknowledge that historically, women have been more victims of harmful marriages. That the patriarchal nature of marriage has often harmed women to a high degree. And so it feels impossible to also completely approach relationships as existing outside of the gender binary, because I think that the reality is the way that our lives and society have been structured is that women often do bear the brunt of some unfairness and inequality. And so I understand perhaps why women are drawn to these conversations, because it is hard to know how to build an equitable relationship and how to build a safer relationship. And so my goal is that, like, as we build more and more of those, and as people have better models of relationships, that it won't be seen as something that is such a gendered topic. But I think that there's still a lot of work to be done there. But I love when I hear, I gave my partner your book, or my partner introduced me to this. And, I think that women and queer people just tend to be more cued into this stuff, which is part of the bigger problem, right? But like, what an honor to get to have such a wonderful audience, and the goal is for this just to spread even more, especially as we're dealing with such an issue with masculinity in this culture.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation in general, because when you think about what's happening, when you hear complaints in a marriage, oftentimes women see it first and try to fix it on their own. And by the time the husbands, and this is obviously very heteronormative, but like by the time the husbands are like being told there's a problem, that is towards the end of like, this is unfixable. Oftentimes, not
well, maybe by the time they listen.
Yes, and that too. Like all of those things are such layered.
I think often they're told and they're not taking it seriously.
Correct. I think a part of that too is that level of like, when it comes to keeping a family, they really put it on women's shoulders.
Absolutely.
To being like, you're the reason it either stays together or falls apart, which is such that's a whole different topic. So we'll have to have you back on for
episodes.
that. I was going to say, we'll have to have you back on that for that. That's
I would love
big
to.
thing. But with all of that, I know you've talked to a lot of people, and obviously a lot of people talk to you about relationships and all the ways they can look, especially as like we're talking about modern relationships and how it's changing. Is there something you have heard or learned from someone else that has changed your perspective and has stuck with you?
This was years ago, but I worked with this woman who's absolutely amazing, and she was going through a divorce at the time, and she I wasn't quite ready to hear it when she said it, but she was like, he was such a, the divorce was very painful. There was cheating. It was like not good, but she was like, he was a great person to raise my kids with. And I think that really changed my opinion about slowly about marriage and relationships, that like they don't have to last forever for them to have still been the right decision at the time. And that just because something ultimately ends or shifts dramatically, like your marriage could have been absolutely wonderful and important and absolutely the right person for you for the amount of time that they were the right person for you, rather than it being completely negated just because it ended.
Yeah, and your books, you interview professionals, and some of the things I was reading, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to think about that. I've never thought about it in that way before, which is great. And that brings me to what I was talking about before, introspection. You talk a lot about, think about these things, ask these questions of yourself. Am I in the good place to break up? Just asking those questions. Why do you think that is so important?
I think that we often take our cues from societal norms or what has worked for people around us, when really we have to be cued into what works for us in our present context. So if we don't really know what's going on with us or what our capacities are or our feelings are in that moment, then we can sort of make decisions that are under the wrong influence rather than being more aligned with our current self and our overall values.
Yes. Well, clearly you're just going to have to come back because we have so many questions, so many other topic ideas. But for now, where can the good listeners find you? What projects do you have that you want to shout out? All of that.
Well, I would love for people to order my book, Save the Date. It's definitely a rom-com heavy on the com, if that's your kind of thing, hopefully. And then you can also check out my Substack, Emotional Support Lady, where I have a weekly post every Tuesday. That's just anything and everything mental health related. So it's like a really lovely community over there. I have a weekly podcast called Just Between Us. And if you're interested in my work as a relationship coach, you can visit AllisonRaskin.com, and all the other stuff's there too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, this was wonderful. Thank you.
And you can also contact us if you would like. You can email us at hello@stuffmomnevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out your iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.